Hi, I'm David from Outlier Technology, where we take your toughest business questions, remove the tech headaches, and leave you with clear, defensible answers. Check us out at outliertechnology.co.uk. In this video, we're going to be looking at why churn prediction won't solve your problems. So the first question that we need to ask is, why are you looking at churn? And typically, the entry point is if you can predict when someone is about to churn, you've got an opportunity to prevent it. So if someone's going to cancel their subscription, for example, if you could predict when that was going to happen, you would be able to take some sort of intervention, offer them a discount, offer them an extra package, do something that would prevent them from cancelling. And this sounds great, and it sounds intuitive, and it sounds really straightforward, but it's exceptionally difficult to do. And the reason that it's exceptionally difficult to do is because there is an almost infinite number of reasons that someone might decide to cancel a service or return a product. It could be a lack of sleep. It could be seeing a competitor's advert on a bus on their commute on the way to work. It could be all manner of different reasons. So very often, these projects to try and predict churn start looking at all sorts of data points that you have available to you. And essentially, they hope that you can pick something out of the data points that you have or that you can easily acquire that will give you some sort of relationship that allows you to predict when that cancellation is going to happen. But fundamentally, that's highly problematic. There's a lot of biases that are at work in that scenario, one of which is bounded rationality. You only record a certain amount of data about your customers, about their habits, about their behaviors. And that's probably being recorded when they're interacting with your product. And you can imply when they're not interacting with your product. You can look at when they last logged in, the last time that they used your service. But it doesn't tell you about all the things that you can't see. And that's where the reasons will very often come from. If there's something very obvious, we might be able to spot it. For example, if a customer complains about the service, complains about a product, that might be a signal that we can look at, and it might give us an indication that the customer is going to cancel, or it might place that customer into a higher risk of cancellation category. But it doesn't tell us definitively if they're going to cancel and when they're going to cancel. And again, we can look across our organization in all the different data sets that we might maintain, from finance through to customer service through to tech support. And we can no doubt find all sorts of relationships between different data points and cancellations. But unless they're very, very obvious, it's unlikely that any of them are going to give us a meaningful enough indicator or allow us to derive a meaningful indicator that will show the strength or the likelihood that someone is actually going to cancel. So is there a better way? Well, yes, there is, but it isn't about predicting churn. So the very first thing that we need to do is take a step back and try and understand what the motivation is for wanting to predict churn in the first place. What is the actual core business driver? And it's very often wrapped up in, well, we want to reduce the number of cancellations. Well, of course we do. Every business wants to reduce the number of cancellations. If we were to flip that question around, we could say that the opposite of that is absolutely absurd. We want to increase the number of cancellations. Well, of course you don't. So it's a very obvious thing for any business to want to do, is reduce the number of cancellations. But actually the thing that underpins it is some other business driver. We want to reduce costs. We want to make our account management team more effective. We want to reduce our acquisition costs, for example. We need to understand why all of a sudden we've had a big glut of cancellations. All of those things are related to churn, they're related to cancellations, but they're not going to be predicted or necessarily helped by being able to say this person is going to cancel in 2 months' time. There's something else going on. So we need to be prepared to dig into the real underlying reason. To give an example, one project that we worked on was a churn prediction project. And it was very firmly, we need to predict churn. And when we started digging under the covers, what we found was the real motivation was to improve the scheduling and availability of the account management team to work on smaller accounts. So they were in a position where for the smaller accounts, one account manager could be managing 300 of those customers, which made it virtually impossible for them to have any sort of personal relationship with any of those customers. They could barely get round to each customer in a year. So what they wanted to try and do was identify which customers it would make sense for those account managers to be targeting. Which of our customers should you be spending your time speaking to, in communication with, offering discounts, that type of thing. So when you unwrap this a little bit, you start to identify that this isn't actually about cancellations in itself. This is about efficient use of resources. And some of those resources are financial resources, some of them are human resources, and some of them may be products, giveaways, that kind of thing. So when we pulled that project apart, what it came down to was a series of interventions. Now, those interventions could be offering a discount. We're worried that this customer might leave us at the end of their subscription term, or they might cancel before the end of their subscription term. And one of the things that we could do about that is offer them a discount for next year. We could offer them a free month or 2 free months of the same product that they have now on the strength of them renewing. Or we could send them a partner product or an additional add-on. Or actually, in some cases, just a phone call to see how are things going with the service. Do you have everything you need? Do you need some training? Would it be useful to have one of our team members contact you and run you through aspects of the product that you're having problems with? Each of these are interventions which can make the difference between whether a customer stays with your product and stays with your company or whether they move on to a competitor. It's about whether the customer is finding value from the product or not. That's really what's driving whether they're going to use it or not. So when you take that approach, when you attempt to dig into the real motivations that underlie it, you can start to treat them then as a distinct problem that is separate from churn. So again, in this case, what we can do is identify the costs associated with each of those interventions. How much financial capital is expended, how much human capital is expended, how much time. So then we can start costing the interventions and we can start doing some modeling to say, this is how many interventions this account manager can reasonably apply within any given month or any given year. And so what we want to make sure now is that we can build a model that gives us the highest rate of, or the highest impact. And with that, we're only really going to know about that impact when it comes to the renewal cycle. So what we have to be able to accept is there's going to be a time lag between when we apply an intervention and when we find out whether it's had any benefit. But that's a very different prospect. And that's a very different entry point to a seemingly magical model that can predict when the customer is going to leave and tell us this customer is going to leave in 2 months' time, so you better start doing something about it. Now, those models don't really work. Unless there's something very obvious, those models don't really work. So what we need to be doing is planning very differently. As I say, if we dug into the underlying business drivers that we're trying to affect, it will lead us down a very different path. And we need to be willing to pick up the tools that are appropriate to be used on that path. So within this, the other aspect of how we need to change our thought processes and our frame of reference is to consider that what we're really doing is a series of experiments. We need to be willing to do a series of experiments. There's no guarantee that any intervention that we take or any action that we take to try and prevent a customer from cancelling is actually going to work. Some of the actions we take, offering a discount, for example, might work with some customers, but with other customers they won't. And we can come up with all manner of reasons and explanations as to why that is the case. But really, if we're prepared to accept that we will have a rate of success or a rate of failure, whichever way we want to look at it, when we try to apply an intervention. What that actually means is we're conducting an experiment. We've got a budget that is going to allow us to give 10% discounts or 10% discounts to 50 customers. And we want to know whether that's going to be valuable or not. But we're not actually going to find out whether it was valuable until we come to renewal time. So this is the other aspect of our kind of thought process that we need to change. We need to accept that we're not going to get instantaneous answers. And this really comes down to flipping our thinking on the idea of success. Because it's very easy to come into a project like this and say, I want a success percentage. I want to be achieving this level of success, and I'll measure it as a percentage of the number of interventions I take versus the number that are successful. Actually, if we flip that the other way around and say, how often can I afford to be wrong? How many of these interventions can I afford to have no meaningful output from? Can I afford to give all of these discounts away and every single customer that I give them to cancels anyway? At what point would it be an acceptable break even? So that's quite a different way of looking at it, because it's very easy to come to it and say, I want 70% success. What you're saying is, I can afford to be wrong about 30% of the time. And rather than putting it in percentages, if you put a cost associated with offering that discount, making that phone call, giving that additional product, you can put a budget around it. You can actually put a financial cost and a budget plan and a business plan potentially around applying that intervention. And that is a very different prospect, but it has to be anchored in the idea that you're not necessarily going to find this out until it comes to renewal. To summarize, predicting churn is nowhere near as valuable as it might seem. It brings all sorts of difficulties with it. And essentially, you're trying to find the relationship between a cancellation and data points that you will very likely never have visibility of. So being able to reliably predict not only if, but when a customer is going to cancel is not only almost impossible, except for the most obvious of cases, but it also misses where a lot of the value is. You need to focus on uncovering the real underlying business driver. Is it about cost saving? And it very often is about cost saving. Is it about better application of resources? What is the real thing that will happen if you manage to reduce the number of cancellations? Could it be that actually increasing the number of upsells could be an alternative to reducing the number of cancellations? Because if we're trying to prevent attrition, maybe we can compensate for that by selling more. So we really need to dig into what the underlying question really is and what are the business drivers that we're really trying to move. And then finally, we need to take an experimental mindset. We need to be prepared to run experiments and accept that the experiment will not be a failure, even if it doesn't give us the result that we were hoping for, because it teaches us something. It teaches us something very valuable about our customers, about our business, and about our processes. So running those experiments, if they don't give us the result that we wanted, should take that feedback and run the next experiment. And be prepared to accept that we might not get immediate feedback. Feedback might take some months or weeks, potentially even years, to be received. And if we can bring all of those things together, the approach to solving our business problems without using churn prediction, without getting lost in the myriad of rabbit holes that we can disappear down with churn prediction, we're much more likely to have a greater level of success.